what are those factors which create peaceful societies and what else is associated with that. So here we go. So a little bit of background on the Institute. The Institute was set up to understand the intersection between business, peace and economics, places special emphasis on metrics to measure peace, and ascribe an economic value to changes in peace. We've got 6 offices around the world, headquartered in Sydney, Australia. We've got offices in New York, Brussels and The Hague, and there for high-level strategic reach. And we've also got offices in Mexico and Zimbabwe, and that's where we actually take the work we're doing and practice it by testing it out on the ground. And I'll come back to more on that further on. So the research is extensively used by groups like the UN, World Bank, Commonwealth Secretariat, OECD, EU, many more. We also do a lot of contract research for those groups. Works included in thousands of university student courses around the world. In fact, we're just talking to someone from doing an international relations course and saying the work just kept on coming up all the time. And that makes me feel good. We've trained over about 1,500 ambassadors worldwide now who go out and give presentations on our work in different places. We had last year over about 200,000 copies of the report downloaded off the web, and there's other groups we know like Web Relief, which have got even bigger downloads of our reports than us. We've got a lot of media outreach. We've got 7 billion global media impressions last year. We got 1 billion social media impressions. That was over about 150 countries. And we've got referenced in about 3,000 books. And so that's about the end of the commercials. Now, if you look at the Global Peace Index, it's in its 13th year. It ranks 163 countries according to their relative states of peacefulness. And that's about 99.7% of the world's population. We use 23 indicators to do this, and it's developed by us, and we've got an expert panel which guides us on what indicators to include and also the weights for those indicators. Now, if you look at the Global Peace Index, it consists of 3 different domains. The first one's international and domestic conflict. We have 6 indicators for that. We have 10 measures of internal measures of safety and security. So they're things like homicide rates, violent crime rates, state-sponsored terror on its citizens, number of police per 100,000 population, people in jail, the level of terrorism within the state as well, and small arms and such. And the final one is 7 measures of militarisation. These 3 come together to form a holistic index. So you can take it out by the 3 domains and analyse it, so you can get different views from those angles, or you can take the index and also cut it so you've got an internal or external set of measurements on it as well. So let's move into the key findings from the last year. So this is a quick mud map of the world. What you'll see is green is very, very good. Red is very, very bad. The big red one up the top is the USSR. It's the 10th from the bottom on the index. Now, what you'll find is Western Europe is the most peaceful region in the world. And in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are the least peaceful. So now if we look at the highlights from the last year, it improved 0.09%. And I know that means nothing to anyone in the audience at such a small amount. In fact, it was basically flat. But the interesting thing is when you look at the number of countries which improved, the number which deteriorated. 86 improved, 76 deteriorated. So you got more improving than deteriorating. And what it says, and you'll see this further on as well, is that it's a lot easier to fall in peace, increases in peace, and much more gradual and over time. So that's a big lesson in that. Now, if we look over the last 12 months, the deteriorations in the index were by perceptions of criminality are going up globally. Number of internal and external conflicts fought in the last 12 months has increased, but the intensity of the really major ones has fallen off. And the number of people incarcerated globally has gone up as well. So if we look at the improvements, it's the deaths from internal conflict. That's because the intensity in the conflicts like in Iraq or in Syria are much, much less. And would you believe, and this is contrary to what's in most people's heads here, military expenditure has actually decreased in the last 12 months as well, as a percentage of GDP when you're counting across countries. So now, if we look at it, Iceland is yet again the most peaceful country in the world. It has been every year we've done the index, and I don't want any jokes about in Iceland it's too cold to go outside. That's why there's no crime. Ukraine and Sudan had the largest improvements. Russia and Eurasia had the largest regional improvements. Russia not so, but its satellite countries have, such as Georgia, which took a big bounce after the conflict there has become more frozen than hot. Europe remains the most peaceful nation, but this is the first time it's improved since 2014. 2014 was the height of ISIL. That's when they first started to launch attacks into Europe and when you got the strong immigration inflows in there as well. Bhutan is now 15th on the index. That's probably the biggest riser in the top part of the index, and it's risen 43 places in the last 12 years. So it's quite remarkable, really. If we look at the other things, Afghanistan's now the world's least peaceful nation, followed by Syria. Nicaragua, Burkina Faso had the largest deteriorations. I know there's a lot of efforts going into Burkina Faso at the moment. Central America and North America had the two largest regional deteriorations. North America's only two countries, Canada and the US, so it's a bit funny. Iran, which was topical at the moment, has dropped 9 places to 139th on the index. The US dropped 4 places to 128, and that's on the back of increased homicide rates, violent crime, increased military expenditure and weapons exports. Just to put it in a nutshell. These are the countries at the top of the index. Nothing too surprising. What you will note, however, is that 9 of those 10 countries are democracies, fully fledged democracies. The one which isn't is Singapore, which is number 7. You'll also find that 5 of the nations are residing in Western Europe. 3 are in Asia, New Zealand, Japan and Singapore. 1 is in North America, Canada, and the other one, Iceland's in the middle of the Atlantic. Now, this is the bottom of the index. What you'll find there is that 9 of those 10 countries are engaged in massive internal conflicts or large internal conflicts, the only exception being Russia. Okay, so if we look at it, it's not a great slide, is it? So these are the countries which have risen in the index over the last 12 months. You'll find the Ukraine's up there. I've got to get awfully close to read this. Sudan, Egypt, North Macedonia and Rwanda. And so you'll find that quite often countries, when they come out of conflict, will bounce quite quickly, and that's what's happened with the Ukraine, for example, or Egypt. If we look at the opposite, these are the ones which fell the most in the index. So they're countries like Iran, Zimbabwe, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Nicaragua and Brazil. And Brazil might come as a bit of a surprise, but if we look at it in the country at the moment, there's a lot of internal angst happening there. If we look at the domains, this gives you safety and security improved in the last 12 months. As did militarisation. However, as already mentioned, ongoing conflict did deteriorate. So what I'm going to do now is just hit, again, this is just really at the high level, last 10 years on peace. There's a few things out of this which I think you'll find intriguing. So if we look at the overall score, it's decreased. And so if we look at it over the last over the last decade, what you'll find is only 3 years where the actual peacefulness has actually improved. And this is the first time since the rise of ISIL that we've actually increased in peacefulness. Now, what I predict is for this year, if we can finish this year without any major conflicts, we'll probably get an improvement in peace yet again. And so providing we don't get any major conflicts again, 2020, I think you'll see peace improve again, because conflicts have a massive flow-on effect. Now, what this says here, it's a little bit, don't know what happened to this slide presentation, it's a bit out, but there's 81 countries increased and 81 countries deteriorated for a 3.8% drop in peace over the last decade. And it's interesting that as many countries improved as deteriorated. So anyone in here reads about in the news is the deteriorations. You never hear about the good news, but there's half the world actually had good news over the last decade. But again, it points that when countries fall, they fall much faster than what they do when they improve. So now if we look at the deteriorations, which of what caused the deterioration in peace, we find that there's a 251% in deaths from conflict or on the battlefield. We find there was a 203% increase in deaths from terrorism. That would have been over 400% if I'd gone back 3 years ago. So terrorism is actually on the improve. And there's now 60 million, there were 60 million people displaced in 2017. The numbers jumped up a little bit in 2018, have come down again a bit now, but still it's roughly the highest number of people since the end of the Second World War. Now, if we look at the various regions and how they've changed over the years, over the decade, we'll find the Middle East and North Africa had the biggest deterioration. Central America and the Caribbean, that's on the back of increased levels of homicide and violent crime. Sub-Saharan Africa also fell, as did North America. Asia Pacific, South Asia and Eurasia all had minor improvements. Now, this is a graph of terrorism. So, we go back, we look at September 11th. That includes the deaths through terrorism in September the 11th. Got the invasion of Iraq, destabilisation of the country. Got the US troop surge in 2007. That caused a 40% drop, and this is the rise of the Syrian civil war and the ISIL's claiming territory in Iraq. See that increase. Now look at the way it's come off. So we're going to be releasing a report in a few days, or next week actually, and what it'll do is it's updates for this year's Global Terrorism Index. So I'll just give you the top line from that. Deaths are down another 15%. ISIL's deaths are down 70% from what they were the year before. Taliban will be the largest terrorist group in the world with a 71% increase. That gives you a very clear indication of how peace is going in Afghanistan. They'll be responsible for 38% of all terrorist deaths. Find that the far-right terrorism's on the increase, 320% in the last 5 years. In fact, there's 71 deaths from far-right terrorism in the first 9 months of this year. You'll also find that although there's a massive drop in the intensity and the number of deaths, the spread of terrorism isn't lessening. There were 71 countries last year with a death from terrorism. That's up 4 from the year before. So that's a quick thumbnail sketch of what we'll be releasing. Now let's hit the improvements in the last decade, and this is the slide I always love. So if we look at it, just about 40% countries had improvements in their political terror score. So political terror is torture, death, and imprisonment without trial. Now, what that means, in many ways, the world has actually become somewhat more civilised. Who would have thought that? Because, again, when we're reading the news, we get the most negative reflections of what's going on. Now, 61% of countries reduced their military expenditure as a percentage of GDP. You'll find even a higher number of countries actually have got less soldiers than what they had a decade ago. We're doing a bit of research with the Oxford University and a couple of other universities at the moment, going back and looking back to prehistoric times on history and peace and trying to measure it. And out of this study, the level of militarisation of societies peaked about 1000 AD. And so what we can see in the last 10 years may be the continuation, although in waves, continuation of less militarisation, which is going on for 1,000 years. Now, when we look at homicides, 72% of countries recorded less homicides. But that's not true for Latin and South America. Homicide rates have gone up there. But the rest of the world, it's on the increase. So it's a lot of good news. We just never get to really hear about it. Now, this slide here tracks the most peaceful countries, least peaceful countries over the last decade. So you'll note the least peaceful countries have become far less peaceful. The most peaceful countries have become slightly more peaceful. So we're watching this growing inequality in global peace. And there's what you could call the conflict trap, which is very, very real, or in systems thinking it's an attractor basin. But also, if you're looking at the most peaceful countries, that's an attractor basin too, because once you get in to being really highly peaceful, very, very hard to get out. Sounds good, doesn't it? A bit like a warm bath. So let's look at the cost of violence of the global economy. We estimated about $14 trillion last year. It's about 11% of GDP, or nearly $2,000 per head. Now, no one in the room can imagine a world which is basically peaceful, but we all can imagine a world which is, let's say, 10% more peaceful. I know I can. And there's a lady in the front row nodding, so I know she can too. Excellent, we're on the same page. So now, let's just think about what that would be worth. But before that, I just want you to think about 1% reduction in the cost of violence to the global economy. That, my friends, is the equivalent of all overseas developmental aid which was spent in 2017. So 1% reduction, the equivalent of doubling overseas developmental aid. And how much does that help towards peace, if that's where it was actually captured? A 10% reduction would be equivalent to all the foreign direct investment last year, or like adding 3 new economies to the world, the size of Switzerland, Ireland and Denmark. So the cost of violence to the global economy truly is profound. The figures we've got are probably underestimated because we can only count what we can count. The real figures are probably about 50% higher. So now, there's an economic argument to peace too, and I just gave you the numbers. So we've just been through that the top end of the index is sticky, the bottom end of the index is sticky. So we took the countries at the top 25% of the index compared to the countries at the bottom 25% of the index, went back 70 years and looked at the GDP growth. On average, the countries in the top had 3 times the GDP growth of the countries in the bottom. That's per annum. So if you think about that and compound that out over 70 years, that's an awful lot of money. So peace does pay for business. So now I'm going to come around to a concept called positive peace. They're the attitudes, institutions and structures which create and sustain peaceful societies. Now, what you'll find is that we've actual peace, you can see, is measured by the Global Peace Index. So what we do then is we've got a whole series of different data sets, about 50,000 down in Sydney at the national level. And we take about a subset of them, about 25,000, and then we do statistical analysis back against the Global Peace Index so that we can understand those factors which are most statistically significantly associated with peace. And that's what we call positive peace. So that's good. And what we do then is we use further analysis to work out how they cluster together. And from that we came up with a topology of 8 different pillars, when we call these the pillars of positive peace, the 8 pillars of positive peace. That then we turn around into an index. Sounds a long way around, but that index is very, very important because it's empirically derived. It's not my thinking on what creates peace. It's not the researcher's idea, it's purely what we can derive from the facts which we've got. So when you've got the Positive Peace Index now, you've got the ability to be able to actually now measure the way a country changes in peace over time. Is it on a virtuous cycle or is it on a vicious cycle? And that, my friends, has profound abilities to be able to look at what you've got to do to actually make countries better. So now it's in its 8th year. We rank 163 countries. got 24 different indicators. It's developed by us. It's empirically derived, and as I said, 25,000 different data sets is used to construct it. So that's one of the largest collections, I think, in the world of national data sets, was what we've got in Sydney now. So positive peace, it comes out with a topology of 8 different pillars. So that's well-functioning government, equitable distribution of resources, sound business environment, low levels of corruption, free flow of information, good relationships with neighbours, high levels of human capital and acceptance of the rights of others. None of that, for anyone in this audience, is counterintuitive. It's all intuitive, which is what makes it very, very interesting. But it works as a system. You can't pull one part out and think it's going to work. So, for example, does corruption affect government? Does the government affect free press? Does free press affect the government? Free press affect corruption, or does corruption affect free press? You can't separate them. They're all intermerged. So really, when you're taking this, one of the profound insights, it's a system. You've really got to look at it all together and then work out how do you deconstruct the system, which will be different in different countries. So also, having arrived at positive peace, when we worked out what else is it associated with. So for one, high levels of per capita income, which we discussed. Societies which are high in positive peace are much, much more resilient, can stand shocks, get better environmental outcomes, higher measures of well-being, and also better performance on MDG, Millennium Development Goals. So in many ways, positive peace describes an optimal environment for human potential to flourish. And so that, my friends, is quite profound. So, whoops. It's very sensitive, this. Ta-da. So this is a quick mud map of the world of positive peace. Dark blue is very, very good. Light blue is very, very bad. So the highest levels you can see are in Western Europe, North America, parts of Oceania. The weakest levels you'll find are in Africa and parts of the Middle East. So that's a quick mud map of the world. So now, what's happened with positive peace? Okay, it's improved 2.6%. Again, the percents don't mean much, but if we look at the countries, actually, what we found, so this is a bit out, 128 countries became more peaceful while 35 deteriorated. So that's big, big difference, isn't it? Now, if we look at the improvements, they were driven by free flows of information, sound business environment, high levels of human capital. That's where the biggest increases were. None of that's, I guess, counterintuitive. When we look at where the decrements were across all the countries, what we find is there's one that's divided up into 3 domains: attitudes, institutions and structures. The attitude domain has come down. And I'll go through that in a little bit of detail in a sec. Well-functioning government, low levels of corruption, acceptance of rights of others have all fallen in many countries globally. Now this here gives an idea of the changes. So we're looking at this top one here, that's attitudes. It's got worse globally over the last decade. If we look at this one down the bottom here, that's structures. So they're things like levels of education, increases in GDP, increases in life expectancy. So structures have all been going up. The institutions, on the other hand, so they're well-functioning government and such, have been staying pretty flat. So the top line headline's good, but when you dig under it, there's some interesting stuff. So we're going to be doing a lot more research over the next 12 months on the concept of attitudes and how those attitudes changing and how they're different in different regions of the world. So we look at all the pillars overall, only one of them in that decade decreased, low levels of corruption. The one which nearly decreased, well-functioning government. So you can imagine how those two actually go together. So now, if we look at the changes in regions, you'll note for positive peace, they've all actually improved other than North America. But North America's just the 2, US and Canada. Now, if we come round and we look at the United States. So United States had one of the biggest decreases in positive peace in the last decade of any country in the world. And you can see it getting played out in the political system. Now, if we look at it, the quality of information has deteriorated the most. Fractionalised elites has deteriorated, and you can see the headbutting which is going on. The group grievances is up, and freedom of the press. So they're the main things which is driving the dynamics in the US at the moment. I'm sure you can all see it, but it actually gets reflected out. Now, at the other end, you'll find that the number of youth are either in training or in employment has improved, gender equality has improved, and the use of the internet has improved. So again, you can see those things playing out in the dynamics of society as well. So, positive peace gives you stronger resilience, better environmental outcomes, higher measures of well-being, better performance on development goals, higher levels of income. So I'm just going to skip through this, but this is really sort of lays out some of the facts on the economic side. So what you find is household consumption grows at twice the rate in countries which are improving in positive peace comparing to ones which are deteriorating. You'll find that the growth in business is 6 times higher in countries which are improving in positive peace than ones which are deteriorating. Domestic currencies appreciate about 1.3% per annum compared to countries which are deteriorating in positive peace where they're falling. And I could keep going. There's a page of these kind of stats. But just to put it in perspective on the GDP, you look at the countries which are improving in positive peace, just compare them to the global average. After a decade, they've got 30% higher GDP growth. That's just compared to the global average. So, now, if we look at resilience, you look at countries with positive peace, they have about the same number of natural disasters as countries with low levels of positive peace, but the number of people who die in those natural disasters is 11% of the countries with low positive peace. And that's back to the resilience. It's the capacity of the countries to cope. It's their abilities to invest ahead of the curve, and sort of obviously wealth does come into it a bit. If we look at countries which are high in peace, they have never recorded a genocide while we've been doing the measurements. They've had no violent conflicts, onsets, in the period which we covered in doing this. And then when we looked at political shocks, there were 2 compared to 70 which were recorded in low positive peace countries. And again, this is a measure of resilience and adaptability, which you can see which comes out of positive peace. It's got a 0.93 correlation strength with measures of well-being. That's incredibly high. So positive peace, get the environment right, it's the optimal environment for human potential to flourish. If we look at civil resistance campaigns in countries which are high in positive peace, they have less civil resistance campaigns, they last for a less amount of time, they're more moderate in their aims, they're more likely to achieve their aims, and they're far, far, far less violent. Now, I'm just going to come down and talk a little bit on positive peace. I'll be finished here in about 5 minutes, maybe slightly less. So, one of the things we've done, so I've been talking about positive peace now when you're looking at the national level. So what we've done is we've collapsed this down into a concept, combined it with some systems thinking theory. And what we've done now is we've actually operationalised this in on-the-ground projects in community projects. So we're now, and this turns out to be really quite profound, because now not only can we talk to peace at this level here, we can take it down into really poor, remote communities in Africa or South Asia, and you can do a community project like water or like health, and you can actually turn it into a peace project, okay? But more than that, by using the framework, you get a different dimension on how you actually go about doing a development program. And now I'm just going to hit at the end of this with one really clear example. So we've now got 17 partners, it'll be more like 20 I think, which are now rolling out positive peace workshops around the world, or positive peace projects. So we run them in Uganda, Kenya, Colombia, Thailand, Mexico, and Cambodia, Australia, US and many other places. And what we've done now is we've trialled it in most of the major different cultures of the world. We find that the framework is politically neutral. It doesn't aggregate or rub there. And we've run them in countries which are highly authoritarian and countries which are highly democratic as well. So far we're in the process now of training 1 million people on positive peace. Got a set of online courses. If anyone's interested in doing it, go to the website, which started to roll out 2 weeks ago. We're getting 50 people a day on the first week of rolling it out. We've increased that to 100, then at about 250 a day, we'll be pretty happy. We've got the 1,500 ambassadors. They're all capable of sort of working in workshops with us, which we've now got around the world, and that's in 106 different countries. We've got people like Banquina University in Barcelona. I'll be there tomorrow. They've developed a master's course which is purely based around this work, which I'm going through on positive peace, and that's the first course 100% dedicated to this, which we know of. We've trained governments. These range from Belfast to the Solomon Islands to many, many others. We've trained military. I've done some of the examples like that are in Mexico, Victorian Police, Brussels Military Academy. And what our aim is to leverage this work through partnerships, because the institute itself is a research institute, and so for this to really take off, we need to leverage. So a major partner, I guess, would be Rotary International. It's the largest civil organisation in the world, 35,000 clubs, 1.3 million members. They've taken positive peace. We've been working with them now for 2 years, and they're rolling that out as projects through all their clubs, and they're using the framework from whenever they do a project within their clubs, that they use the framework to do it. That way they instill the concept of peace into the people, the major things they need to focus on in their own communities to understand what'll work, and they learn it through just doing a simple project which should come out of any developmental aid. Now what I'm going to do is step you through one of these. That'll be the end of the end of this presentation. So in Rotary, there's a club there called the Kampala Sissi Islands. And so they were doing a literacy project in a school in a really, really poor part of Uganda. So this is not in the poorest billion, it's the poorest of the poor of the bottom billion. So this was really poor. And it's a primary school, and the idea, they've been working there for about 3 years before they adopted our framework, without making much change in the literacy rates in the school or improvement. So now, between 2016 and 2018, it's probably more like about an 18-month project, I think. They actually had phenomenal improvement in the rates. So what they did is the number of kids enrolled in that period jumped from 327 up to 805, okay? So think about it, that's spectacular. That's spectacular. The performance, before the project started, the 30% of the students were getting in the first and second grades, which were considered appropriate. The rest were getting low grades. After the project, that doubled. 62% of the students were now getting 1 and 2 grades, and only 40% of them lower grades. That all seems pretty phenomenal, doesn't it? Okay, like wow. But now I'm just going to step you through over the next 2 minutes on just how that came about. So, very, very sensitive, this. Okay, so it's been blacked out, but up this top one up here, so we took the project and then looked through what was an intervention you could do through each of the 8 lenses of positive peace. That's how we went. So the first one up there is well-functioning government. And so what they did, pretty simple, they brought in the local leaders, got them engaged in the program, got their buy-in to the program, and told them what it was about. Before that, it's just doing a literacy project. They're only talking to the teachers. Sound business environment, like one of the classrooms was falling apart. So what they did is they restructured the classroom, but they focused on getting as much as they could, including the labour, as close as they could to the school, okay, as close as they could to the school. And the idea of that was just to really stimulate that very local community. And they could have gone 20 kilometres further and bought some of the ingredients cheaper, but they didn't do it.